They say the swamp keeps secrets. Down here in the Blackwater Parish, folks know that some nights, when the rain has washed the world clean and the air is thick enough to drink, you don't go looking for things in the dark, because sometimes you find them. I should have listened. I was just a man trying to make a living, but the thing I found that night, the boy by the bayou, he was looking for something too.
The old-timers say that you can smell a bad storm long before you see it. They say it's a scent of ozone and wet earth, a promise of violence carried on a wind that has yet to blow. That evening, back in the late 40s, the air in Blackwater Parish was thick with that promise. The sky to the west, which had been a brilliant bruised orange just an hour before, was now turning the color of a deep plum, churning and boiling in on itself. I stood on the porch of our small clapboard house, watching it come. The humidity was a physical weight, a wet blanket that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a chore.
My son, Caleb, was inside. I could hear the faint, rhythmic creak of the floorboards as he moved around, getting ready for bed. He was a good boy, 12 years old with a quiet spirit and my late wife's eyes. Looking at the approaching storm, a familiar ache settled in my chest. It was on nights like this, when the world seemed to hold its breath, that I missed her the most. The first clap of thunder wasn't a crack. It was a low, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate up from the very soil. Then came the lightning, a silent, spidery fracture in the sky that illuminated the world in a flash of stark white and deep shadow. A moment later, the rain began. It wasn't a drizzle, it was a deluge, as if a celestial bucket had been upended. It hammered against our tin roof, a deafening, relentless roar that drowned out all other sound. I sat in the dark for hours, listening. The storm was a wild thing, untamed and furious, and I let its energy wash over me. But as the hours bled into the deep night, the fury began to subside. The hammering on the roof softened to a steady drumming, then to a gentle patter, and finally to a dripping silence punctuated by the chirping of a million newly awakened insects. A hunter's instinct stirred in me. That kind of rain, a true gully washer, would have flooded every hole and burrow in the parish. The frogs, big bullfrogs with legs thick as a man's thumb, would be driven out under the banks of the paddies and bayous. They'd be dazed, easy pickings. And easy pickings meant good money at the market in town. Money we needed. I went to the back of the house and quietly gathered my gear. The long, three-pronged gig, its tines sharpened to a needle point, my carbide lamp, which hissed and spat as I lit it, and a large burlap sack. My boots thumped softly on the wooden floor. "Caleb," I whispered, pushing open the door to his small room. "Wake up, son. Time to go frogging." He just groaned, a lump under a thin blanket. He turned over, his back to me. "Too tired, Pa," he mumbled into his pillow. "Come on now," I urged, a little more loudly. "The hunting's gonna be good tonight. This rain'll have him sitting up and begging for it." He mumbled something else, an incoherent protest lost in the fabric. I sighed. He was at that age, the cusp of manhood, where sleep was a precious commodity he could never get enough of. Part of me, the part that remembered my own father dragging me out on nights like this, wanted to insist, "It builds character," I could hear him say. But another part, the softer part that saw my wife's weariness in his slumber, relented. "All right, son," I whispered, pulling the door almost shut. "You sleep. I'll go it alone." The night air was cool and clean. The world smelled of wet soil, jasmine and decay, the holy trinity of the bayou.
My boots made sucking sounds in the mud as I walked the narrow levee that separated the rice paddies. The beam from my lamp cut a perfect dancing circle of white through the darkness. It was just as I'd predicted. They were everywhere.
I saw the first one within 20 yards of the house, a big, mottled green bullfrog, sitting perfectly still, its throat pulsing. It was mesmerized by the light. I crept forward, raised the gig, and struck, a quick, practiced motion. The frog was in the sack before it knew what had happened. Then another, and another. It was a slaughter. My sack, draped over my shoulder, grew heavy with a satisfying, lumpy weight. I moved further from the house, following the winding waterways deeper into the parish, my mind focused entirely on the hunt. I worked my way towards the old Henderson property, a large fallow field that bordered the deeper, wilder part of the swamp. It was a prime spot. The drainage ditches there were wide and slow-moving, perfect breeding grounds. As I walked, I idly swept my lamp across the darkness, checking for the glint of eyes. I half expected to see the Thompson sisters, Sarah and Emily. They were a tough pair who often worked the same grounds. But the night was empty of any other light but my own. Guess the rain kept everyone else in, I murmured to myself, the sound of my own voice a small comfort in the vast, listening silence. The Henderson place was just as fruitful as I'd hoped. Pair after pair of frogs sat stunned in my light, and my gig did its grim work. Before long, my first sack was nearly full, the squirming weight of it awkward on my back. I stopped for a moment, setting the sack down and wiping a sleeve across my sweaty brow. It was then that I saw it, or rather, him. Further down the levee, where the path curved towards the cypress brake, there was a shape. A small, hunched figure sitting right on the muddy bank, almost at the water's edge. My lamp beam found it and held. It was a boy. I frowned. What in God's name was a child doing out here, alone in the middle of the night? He wasn't moving, just sitting there, head bowed, as if he were asleep. A flicker of concern, sharp and paternal, cut through my hunter's focus. Slowly, I walked towards him, my boots squelching in the mud. "Hey there," I called out, my voice gentle. I didn't want to startle him. "You all right, son?" He didn't move. I got closer, the circle of my light now fully encompassing him. He was small, maybe Caleb's age, but skinnier. He was wrapped in what looked like a poncho woven from large overlapping leaves and vines, still slick with rain. It was a strange garment, like something from another time. His head was tucked down, his face buried in his knees. "Son?" I said again, now only a few feet away. I cleared my throat, a loud, deliberate sound. The boy flinched at the noise and slowly, so slowly lifted his head, but he didn't look at me. He just stared out across the black water, his face still mostly hidden in the shadow of his own form. Then, with a lethargic movement, he raised a thin arm and pointed. I followed his gesture. Far in the distance, I could just make out another light, a tiny yellow flicker that appeared for a moment before vanishing behind a thicket of cypress trees. "You with your pa?" I asked, assuming he'd been left behind. "He go on ahead of you?" The boy didn't answer with words. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then came a voice so quiet it was barely a whisper, a tired, raspy sound. "So sleepy," he breathed, "waiting here." I chuckled, my concern easing. It made sense. Poor kid was just tuckered out. "Got that sleepy bug, huh? I know the feeling. Not afraid of the dark?" No haint's gonna get you out here by your lonesome? He shook his head. Just a simple, silent no. An idea sparked in my mind. The big sack was getting cumbersome, and my luck was running too hot to quit now. If I could stash this one and fill another, it'd be the best haul of the season. Well, listen here, I said, my tone friendly. Since you're sitting here anyway, you think you could do me a favor? Just watch this sack of frogs for me. I'm gonna make one more round, and this thing is a bear to lug around. That'd be all right?
The boy didn't speak. He just nodded again, a slow, deliberate lowering and raising of his hidden face. "Attaboy," I said, feeling a sense of relief. It felt less lonely out here, knowing there was another soul nearby, even a sleepy, silent one. "I appreciate it. Don't you let any of them hop away now." I turned away, leaving my heavy sack sitting on the muddy bank next to the strange, still child. As I walked away, my lamp cutting a new path into the darkness, I had the fleeting thought that I never actually saw his face. But the thought was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the hunter's thrill as I spotted the glint of two more golden eyes in the distance. The night was still young, and the haul was getting better by the minute.
My second sack was already a quarter full. I felt a surge of pride, of a job well done. It was a good night's work that would put food on our table, and then some. The air was still and heavy. The only sounds the gentle lapping of water against the muddy banks and the high-pitched symphony of the insects. I moved with a practiced rhythm, my body and the tools in my hands acting as one. Scan, spot, step, strike. It was a dance I had known my whole life. I was feeling so confident, so at ease in my element, that it took me a moment to register the new sound. It wasn't the plop of a frog or the drone of a mosquito. It was a chittering, accompanied by a splashing that was too rhythmic, too coordinated to be natural. It came from a dense patch of reeds just ahead. I stopped, listening, my gig held at the ready. My first thought was otters, maybe. I swept the beam of my lamp over the spot. The light cut through the darkness, and what it revealed made me freeze. It wasn't otters. Clustered at the water's edge was a group of rats, but these were unlike any I had ever seen. They were enormous, their bodies thick and muscular as a grown cat's leg. There were 8 or 9 of them, their fur a greasy, dark brown plastered to their skin. They didn't scatter when my light hit them. They turned towards it, towards me, and a collective set of beady, crimson eyes fixed on my own. They just stared, their noses twitching, their teeth long and yellow, slightly bared. A ripple of unease went through me. I'd dealt with swamp rats my whole life. They were pests, but they were cowards. They scattered from light and noise. These creatures were bold, their stillness unnatural and challenging. "Get on now! Get!" I yelled, taking a step forward and brandishing the gig. They didn't move. Instead, the chittering sound they were making changed, rising in pitch and pace until it sounded eerily like a chorus of mocking, wheezing laughter. Then, the largest of them, a brute that looked like it could weigh 10 pounds, lunged forward. I reacted on instinct, swinging the heavy wooden handle of the gig. I aimed to crack its skull, but the creature was impossibly fast. It dodged the blow with a fluid sidestep, the gig splashing uselessly in the mud beside it. The entire group seemed to take this as a signal. As one, they made that horrible, chittering laugh again, then turned and slipped into the black water. There was no panicked splashing, no frantic scramble. They just submerged, one after another, and vanished. The silence they left behind was sudden and profound. My heart was hammering against my ribs.
I stood there for a full minute, breathing heavily, scanning the water's surface. Nothing. It was as if they had never been there. I tried to find a rational explanation. Nutria, I told myself. A whole family of them, maybe sick. But I knew the sound of nutria, the shape of them. This was different. The intelligence in their eyes, the coordinated mockery of their retreat. It was wrong. It felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. The warm, humid air suddenly felt cold against my skin. I should have turned back then. I should have taken it as the sign it so clearly was, a warning from the swamp itself. But pride, or maybe just plain foolishness, pushed me onward. I shook my head, trying to clear the image of those red eyes, and forced my feet to move. Just a little further, I told myself. Fill the sack and go home. I hadn't gone 50 yards when the next sound reached me. This one was different. It wasn't menacing. It was pathetic. A faint mewling cry, like a kitten in distress.
Now what? I thought, a fresh wave of irritation mixing with my lingering fear. I swept my lamp towards the sound, which came from the base of a gnarled cypress tree. Two figures emerged from the shadows, stepping into the white circle of my light. It was a pair of cats. One was as white as bone, the other as black as pitch. "Well, I'll be," I muttered. "What are you two doing all the way out here?" They meowed again and trotted towards me, but their gait was strange. It was too smooth, too deliberate. As they got closer, I saw that they were soaked, their fur dripping with swamp water, but it wasn't matted or clumped. It lay flat and sleek against their bodies, shimmering in my light, almost like polished metal.
Before I could react, they were at my feet. They didn't rub against me in the friendly way a normal cat would. They pressed themselves against my legs, their movements sinuous and snake-like. And then I felt it. The cold. It was a shocking, unnatural cold. A damp, penetrating chill that felt like death itself. It seeped through the thick denim of my jeans, instantly raising goosebumps on my skin and making the muscles in my legs ache. It was the cold of a body that had been lying at the bottom of the bayou for a week. "Get off!" I hissed, kicking out. I managed to shove the white one away, but the black one was faster, clinging to my calf. I could feel its icy body through my boot. A wave of revulsion, so strong it was almost nausea, washed over me.
I brought the handle of my gig down hard, not to kill it, but just to knock it away. I struck the black cat squarely on its back. It let out a screech, but it wasn't the yowl of a cat. It was a high, thin, piercing sound that sounded horribly human, filled with a spite and hatred that made my blood run cold. The white cat joined in, its own scream harmonizing with the first. Then, like the rats before them, they turned in perfect unison, bounded to the water's edge, and leaped in. They vanished into the black depths without a ripple. I was shaking. The cold spot on my legs where they had touched me was still there, a phantom chill that I couldn't rub away. That was it. That was enough. The frogs, the money, none of it mattered anymore. The swamp felt alive around me, and it was watching me with a malevolence I had never known. The friendly whisper of the wind through the reeds now sounded like a sibilant threat. The darkness between the trees was no longer empty. It was filled with waiting things. My only thought was of getting back to the levee, back to the boy. The thought of that silent, hunched figure, which had seemed so strange just a short while ago, was now a beacon of comfort. He was human. He was an anchor in this world that was tilting into madness. I had to get back to him. I turned, my second sack of frogs forgotten on the ground, and began to walk, quickly at first, then breaking into a near run, my heavy boots slapping against the wet earth. I just wanted to see the familiar shape of the boy, retrieve my catch, and get the hell back to the safety of my own four walls.
My boots pounded a desperate rhythm on the wet earth. Every shadow seemed to leap and twist in the corner of my eye. Every nocturnal splash in the water sounded like something enormous shifting its weight just beyond the reach of my lamp. The rational part of my brain, the part that had guided me through these swamps for 30 years, was screaming. It catalogued the unnatural events, the intelligent rats, the death-cold cats. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve, a signpost on a road I should never have taken. Fear was a bitter taste in the back of my throat. Finally, through the cypress trees, I saw it. The familiar curve of the levee, the spot where I had left the boy. He was still there, a small, hunched silhouette against the black water, exactly as I had left him. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed through me. He was there. He was real. Maybe the other things, maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. Tiredness and shadows can make a man see things.
"Hey!" I called out, my voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "I'm back!" The boy didn't move or respond. As I drew closer, my relief began to curdle. My eyes fell upon my burlap sack, the one I had left in his care. It wasn't sitting upright and plump as I had left it. It was lying on its side, a sad, limp piece of cloth slumped in the mud. It was empty. "What the?" I stammered, stopping dead. I stared at the sack, my mind refusing to process the sight. "Hey, kid!" My voice was sharp now, all pretense of friendliness gone. "What happened? Where are my frogs?" The boy slowly shook his head, his face still buried in his knees. Anger, hot and swift, replaced my fear. "Don't shake your head at me. That was half a night's work. Did the knot come loose? Did you fall asleep and let them get away?" He remained silent. I strode forward and stood over him, my shadow falling upon his small form. I was seething. The fear I'd felt from the rats and cats now felt like a foolish distraction, and this kid's incompetence was the real problem. "Answer me, boy. Did you let them out? There's no way they got out on their own. Who else is out here? You think a ghost came along and ate them all?" The question was pure sarcasm, a bitter barb meant to shame him into answering. But the boy didn't shrink away. At the mention of the word ghost, he stopped shaking his head. He went perfectly still. Then, with a chilling deliberation, he nodded his head once. Yes. He slowly, agonizingly lifted his head to look at me, and for the first time, the beam of my carbide lamp fell full upon his face.
The breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a human face. The skin was the color of old tallow, waxy and translucent. The kind of skin you see on a body that's been in the water too long. His eyes, dear God, his eyes. They were two bottomless pools of black. No whites, no iris, just a solid, liquid darkness that seemed to drink the light from my lamp. He spoke, and his voice was no longer a tired whisper. It was a low, wet, guttural rasp that seemed to bubble up from a deep, cold place. Wasn't a ghost. It was me. And then he smiled. No, not a smile. He opened his mouth. It unhinged. The corners of his lips stretched impossibly wide, his jaw distending like a snake's, splitting his pale face into a cavernous, gaping maw. And the inside was a glistening nightmare of red gore and mangled green flesh. I could see the crushed bodies of my frogs, the white of their bellies mixed with the crimson of their own blood. A single perfect hind leg, still attached to a piece of spine, dangled from his upper jaw, twitching faintly. The stench that erupted from that hole, the smell of raw meat, swamp muck, and something anciently foul hit me like a physical blow. My mind simply broke.
There was no thought, no reason, no plan. The part of my brain that made me a man, that reasoned and spoke and hoped, switched off entirely. All that was left was the animal. A scream tore itself from my lungs, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. I threw my hands up as if to ward off the sight, dropping my carbide lamp, my gig, my second sack of frogs. The world dissolved into a dizzying chaos of tumbling light and shadow. The lamp clattered to the ground, its beam spinning wildly, illuminating a patch of mud, a cypress knee, and then that monstrous grinning face one last time before I turned. I ran. I ran blindly, away from the path, away from anything that resembled order. I crashed through a wall of sharp-edged reeds that tore at my clothes and skin. I stumbled, fell to my hands and knees in the cold, sucking mud, and scrambled back up without feeling the pain. Behind me, a new sound began, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my days. It was the boy's laughter, a wet, gurgling, bubbling sound, ancient and overjoyed, that echoed across the water and pursued me into the suffocating darkness of the deep swamp.
There is no map for the geography of pure terror. My legs carried me, but my mind was gone, left behind with that gaping, gore-filled mouth. I ran without direction, a panicked animal crashing through the undergrowth. Sawgrass sliced at my arms and face, leaving fiery trails of pain I barely registered. I splashed through knee-deep water, black and cold, then clawed my way up muddy banks on the other side, only to plunge back into the darkness. The only light was the high, indifferent moon, its silvery glow fractured into 1,000 pieces by the dense cypress canopy, offering no comfort, no guidance. The wet, gurgling laughter that had pursued me began to fade, not abruptly, but slowly, as if it were being swallowed by the swamp itself. Its absence should have been a relief, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was a heavy, listening silence, thick with ancient patience. I was alone, without a lamp, without a weapon, lost in the heart of a place I thought I knew. I finally collapsed, my lungs screaming for air, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. I leaned against the massive trunk of a cypress, gasping, trying to force my brain to work. "Get your bearings, Jedediah," I told myself, my own voice a shaky whisper in my head. "You know this land." I looked up, trying to find the North Star, but the canopy was too thick. I looked at the water, trying to discern its flow, but here, in the deep bayou, it was still and stagnant, a black mirror reflecting nothing. Everything felt wrong. The trees seemed too close together, their shapes alien and menacing. The familiar smell of jasmine and decay was gone, replaced by the cloying scent of stagnant water, and something else. Something like cold, damp stone, like the inside of a tomb. It was then that I saw a light. Far off to my left, a single pinprick of yellow light flickered through the trees. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. Another hunter, a trapper's cabin, someone with a lantern who could lead me out of this nightmare. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Over here!" I pushed myself off the tree and began stumbling towards it, my boots sinking deep into the muck with every step. The light didn't move. It just pulsed gently, a welcoming beacon. But as I got closer, a cold dread began to extinguish my hope. It wasn't a lantern. It was too steady, and it cast no beam. It was a globe of soft ethereal light floating in the air about 6 feet above the water. As I stared, another one appeared next to it, this one a sickly green. Then a third, the color of a pale blue flame. They began to move, not drifting on a breeze, but dancing. They weaved around each other, bobbing and dipping in a silent, hypnotic ballet. They were spook lights, haint lights, the will-o'-the-wisps my grandmother used to warn me about, spirits of the swamp meant to lead travelers to their doom.
They began to drift away from me, deeper into the swamp, their dance an unmistakable invitation. Follow us. I knew what they were. I knew I shouldn't follow. I turned to go the other way, but as I did, more lights appeared, blocking my path. They were everywhere, a silent, mocking constellation of spectral fire guiding me, herding me. Then came the crying. It started so faintly I thought it was a night bird. But it grew, and the sound resolved itself into something unmistakable and horrifying. The wail of a newborn baby. It was a sound of pure misery, thin and desperate, and it seemed to come from right in front of me. I froze, straining my eyes in the darkness. Another cry joined the first from my right, then another and another, until the air was filled with a chorus of ghostly sobbing infants. My blood ran cold. This was a legend I had only heard whispered, a tale so dark that most folks refused to speak it. The spirits of the unbaptized, the abandoned, left to cry in the swamp for eternity. The moonlight broke through the canopy for a brief moment, illuminating a wide, muddy bank just ahead of me. My stomach heaved. The mud wasn't empty. It was littered with small, pale, glistening shapes. Dozens of them. Some lay still, like discarded dolls. Others twitched feebly. I could see the vague outline of tiny limbs, of small round heads. One of them, impossibly, seemed to raise a thin, translucent arm towards me, its silent cry joining the cacophony that was tearing my sanity apart.
That was the breaking point. The monstrous boy, the rats, the cats. They were horrors, but they were singular things to be fled from. This was a sorrow so profound, a wrongness so deep that it poisoned the very air I was breathing. No, 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 I whimpered, sinking to my knees in the cold water. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could not block out the sound. It was inside my head, a symphony of suffering. I knew with a terrible, soul-crushing certainty what was happening. I was ghost-led. Ma Dat. The swamp had me. It was playing with me, driving me in circles, leading me from one horror to the next, draining my hope and my will. I wasn't just lost, I was captured. I looked up. The spectral lights continued their silent, patient dance above me, and the air echoed with the cries of the dead. I was in hell, and it was made of mud and cypress and the tears of children.
I don't know how long I knelt there in the mud, a broken man in a cathedral of sorrow. Time had lost all meaning. It was an eternity of cold water, dancing lights, and the sound of weeping children. Part of me wanted to simply lie down, to let the black water fill my lungs and end it. It would be a mercy. But then, a flicker of something stubborn and primal, something that refused to be extinguished, sparked in my chest. It was the image of Caleb's face, sleeping peacefully in his bed. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't let the swamp have me.
With a groan that was more animal than human, I pushed myself to my feet. I ignored the lights. I ignored the crying. I put one foot in front of the other, a mindless automaton driven by a single, desperate purpose. Forward.
I didn't know where forward was, but it was better than staying in that place of waking nightmares. I walked for what could have been minutes or an hour. The terrain was a torturous blur of tangled roots, sucking mud, and thorny vines that tore at my already shredded clothes. And then I broke through a thicket of palmettos and saw it. My heart seized in my chest. It was something solid, something real, something man-made. It was the old Rachette Bridge, a rickety wooden structure spanning a deep, slow-moving channel of the Bayou. I knew this bridge. I had crossed it 100 times. Its presence meant I was less than 2 miles from the main parish road. A surge of adrenaline, of pure, undiluted hope shot through me. I wasn't lost anymore. I knew the way home. As I stumbled toward the foot of the bridge, a new sound cut through the night, a low, guttural growl that came from the bridge itself. Instantly, the spook lights that had been tormenting me flickered and vanished. The chorus of crying babies died out, plunging the world into a sudden, shocking silence. From the shadows at the far end of the bridge, a figure emerged. It stepped into a patch of moonlight, and I saw that it was a dog. A big black dog, built solid like a Labrador, its coat the color of starless midnight. It stood its ground, watching me, the low growl still rumbling in its chest.
I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was dizzying. I'd heard the old tales. Sometimes a guardian spirit appears as a black dog to protect travelers from the true evils of the night. It had driven the haints away. It had saved me. "Hey there, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Good boy." The dog's growl subsided. It took a few steps onto the bridge, its claws making a solid, reassuring thump-thump sound on the weathered planks. This was a real creature, made of flesh and bone. This was my salvation. I started walking towards it, my fear replaced by a desperate, tearful relief. We met in the middle of the bridge, the dark, silent water flowing below us. The dog stopped a few feet away, its head cocked, its dark eyes watching me. I reached out a trembling hand, wanting to touch it, to thank this guardian who had appeared in my darkest hour. That's when it began to change. It started with a sound, not a bark or a growl, but a wet, sickening noise of stretching a hide and popping, grinding joints. The dog's shoulders began to broaden, its form swelling upwards and outwards. Its legs thickened, its back arched, and its head rose higher and higher. It was growing, impossibly, horrifically. The wood of the old bridge groaned and splintered under its rapidly increasing weight.
I was frozen, paralyzed by a terror far greater than anything I had felt before. This was not a ghost. This was a violation of reality itself. The creature before me was no longer a dog. It was a behemoth, bigger than a prize bull, a monstrous fusion of canine and bovine, its furs still pitch black, but its form something from a madman's dream. Its eyes, once the familiar brown of a dog, now glowed like 2 red-hot coals. It towered over me, its shadow swallowing me whole. It opened a mouth filled with dagger-like teeth and let out a roar that was not of this world, a deafening, guttural bellow that shook the bridge to its foundations and echoed across the entire swamp. Then, with a speed that defied its immense size, it turned. It planted 2 massive clawed paws on the wooden railing, shattering the old wood, and vaulted into the air. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the colossal splash that would surely swamp the bridge and drag me down with it. I waited. Clink, clink, clink. The sound was so small, so laughably insignificant that my brain couldn't comprehend it. It was the sound of a single, tiny pebble
being dropped into the water. I opened my eyes. The monster was gone. The water was still. I was alone on the shaking bridge, my heart hammering a frantic, panic tattoo against my ribs, the impossible roar still echoing in my ears. The path ahead was clear, but the hope I had felt moments before was gone, replaced by the chilling certainty that the horrors of this night were not just content to chase me, but to walk ahead and wait.
For a long time, I just stood on that bridge, my knuckles white where I gripped the splintered railing. My body was a taut wire of terror, vibrating with the phantom echo of that monstrous roar. The world had gone silent again, but it was a predatory silence now, the kind that precedes a strike. The path ahead, which had represented salvation just minutes before, now felt like the throat of a serpent. I had escaped the swamp's chaotic heart, only to find myself on a road where the horror seemed to wait patiently for my arrival. But I couldn't stay on the bridge. To stay was to die. With a will that felt borrowed, I forced my legs to move, stepping off the bridge and back onto the muddy track. Every step was an agony of suspense. My head swiveled constantly, my eyes trying to pierce the oppressive darkness on either side of the path. The night was no longer filled with overt threats, but with a suffocating sense of being watched, of a deep, ancient intelligence that knew my every move. The path wound on, a ribbon of pale mud under the moonlight. After what felt like another lifetime of walking, a new shape emerged from the darkness ahead. It was a building, its silhouette stark against the star-dusted sky. Normally, seeing it would have been another small comfort, another milestone on the path home. But not tonight. The schoolhouse had been abandoned for 30 years, and in that time it had gathered its own dark legends, its own special vintage of fear. As I drew closer, my pace slowing, I could hear why. Faint sounds were drifting from the derelict building, a low rhythmic murmur, like the sound of children reciting their lessons in a monotonous drone. Then a sharp, distinct tap, tap, tap. The sound of a ruler striking a wooden desk. My blood turned to ice in my veins. A new noise joined the chorus, a high, thin squeal that I recognized with a sickening lurch. Chalk being dragged across a slate blackboard. My first instinct was to bolt, to turn and run back into the relative anonymity of the swamp. But the memory of the dancing lights and the weeping babies stopped me. Behind me was a maze of madness. Ahead, on the path, was this haunted echo. I had to go past it. It was the only way. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself forward, my eyes locked on the decaying structure. That's when I saw her. On the highest peak of the sagging roof, a figure appeared. It rose up as if from the shingles themselves, a tall, impossibly thin woman in a long, flowing white garment that looked like a burial shroud. Her most terrifying feature was her hair. It was a solid mass of pitch blackness, a cascade that fell from her head over her shoulders and down her back, pooling on the roof around her feet like a spill of ink. As I watched, paralyzed, the stories my grandmother told me flooded my mind, the words as clear as if she were whispering them in my ear. The story of Miss Alara, the school teacher who had arrived in the parish decades ago, beautiful and kind, with a smile that could charm the bees from the flowers.
The story of the brutish gang leader from across the river who became obsessed with her, who saw her not as a person, but as a prize to be taken. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Miss Alara's family had tried to smuggle her out of the parish in the dead of night, but the gang was waiting. They caught her on this very path. But she was proud, my grandmother had said. She would not be taken. Rather than fall into their hands, she had used the brute's own skinning knife, which he laid on the ground to end her own life, right there in the shadow of her beloved schoolhouse. And her spirit, they said, never left. But the sweetness she had in life had curdled into a deep, vengeful bitterness in death. She haunted this stretch of road, her sorrow twisted into a cold hatred for the men who traveled it alone in the dark. The figure on the roof began to move. She didn't climb down, she glided. She floated from the peak, her white shroud undisturbed by any breeze, her black hair trailing behind her. She descended with a horrifying, weightless grace into the schoolyard, her feet never seeming to touch the ground. She was on the path now, standing between me and my way home. Her face was a pale, featureless oval, but I could feel her gaze on me, cold and full of ancient rage. She began to drift towards me, a silent, gliding wraith of vengeance. I was trapped. The formless horrors of the deep swamp were behind me, and this legendary, hateful spirit was ahead, and she was getting closer with every beat of my hammering heart.
She glided closer, a silent ship of vengeance on a sea of night. The air around her grew frigid, a tangible aura of grief and hatred that stole the breath from my lungs and pricked my skin with 1,000 icy needles. I tried to step back, to run, but my boots felt as though they were nailed to the muddy earth. My body was paralyzed, a spectator to my own demise. Her featureless white face was a void that threatened to swallow what was left of my sanity. The murmuring from the schoolhouse grew louder, a chorus of ghostly children urging her on. My mind, a frantic animal caught in a trap, raced through every scrap of folklore I had ever heard. Iron repels evil. I had no iron but the buckle on my belt. Salt burns them. There was no salt in this godforsaken swamp. Running water is a barrier she had appeared on the wrong side of. Was out of tricks, out of options. She was a legend come to life, and her story always ended the same way, with a man's mind or body broken. She raised a long, white, spectral arm, the sleeve of her shroud falling away to reveal a limb of pure, cold light. She was 10 feet away, then 5. I could feel the coldness of the grave seeping into my bones. And then a memory surfaced, from the deepest, most forgotten corner of my mind. It wasn't a legend or a myth. It was a simple truth my grandmother used to tell me as a child when I was afraid of the dark. "Don't you worry, Jedediah." Her voice echoed in my head, a warm, steady anchor in the storm of my terror. No matter how dark the night gets, no matter how scary the shadows seem, they all have to run from the sun. And the rooster is the one who calls the sun home. It was insane. It was the logic of a child's fairy tale against a nightmare made real. It was foolish. It was all I had left.
The ghost was almost upon me now, her hand reaching. I squeezed my eyes shut, drew in a ragged, desperate breath that filled my aching lungs, puffed out my chest, and threw my head back. Cock-a-doodle-doo! The sound that came out of my throat was pathetic. It was a strangled, high-pitched squawk, cracking with fear and exhaustion. It was less a rooster's proud call and more the death cry of a hen. A profound, humiliating silence fell. The murmuring from the schoolhouse stopped. The lady in white herself paused, her hand hovering inches from my face as if perplexed by this bizarre final act of defiance. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. It failed, I thought, a wave of utter despair washing over me. What a fool, to die squawking like a chicken. Then, from far away, a sound answered me.
A real rooster, on a farm a mile down the road, let out a powerful, full-throated crow, clear and confident in the deep night. Another, closer by, immediately answered it, and then another, and another, a chain reaction of life, a chorus of feathered heralds announcing a dawn that was still just a promise. The effect on the lady in white was instantaneous and violent. She recoiled as if struck by lightning. A shriek tore from her, but it had no sound. It was a silent, soul-tearing scream of pure agony that vibrated in my bones. Her form, once so solid, began to unravel. The edges of her white shroud dissolved like mist, and her long black hair turned to ropes of black smoke, whipping in a wind that I couldn't feel. She flickered once, twice, her featureless face contorted in a rictus of pain. With one last, desperate grasp at existence, she dissolved completely, vanishing into the night as if she had never been. The oppressive cold vanished with her. The air was suddenly just cool, damp swamp air. The silence was no longer menacing. It was just silence. I stood there, shaking uncontrollably, the pathetic echo of my own squawk still ringing in my ears. I slowly, fearfully, turned my gaze to the east. There, on the horizon, stretched a thin, miraculous line of pearlescent gray. The dawn was coming. The night was broken. I don't remember much of the walk home. It was a slow, stumbling journey of a man who had been hollowed out and scraped clean. I was an automaton of mud and scratches and terror, putting one foot in front of the other. The world began to slowly regain its color as the sky brightened from gray to pink, then to a brilliant, life-affirming orange.
I reached my own small house just as the first rays of sunlight touched the tin roof, making it gleam like a promise. I pushed open the door, my body screaming with a pain I was only now beginning to feel. The first thing I saw was Caleb, still asleep in his bed, his chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of a child's slumber. He was safe. I was home. I didn't make it to my own bed. I slid down the wall just inside the door, the last of my strength leaving me in a great, shuddering rush. The nightmare was over. I was alive. And as the warm, golden light of the morning sun streamed through the doorway, I finally let the darkness take me. But this time, it was the welcome, dreamless darkness of sleep.